Hi group, it's Katie doing your first vlog prompt. This week we read, I'm going to focus mostly on the articles. I found them to be the most interesting, especially the Deans of Women article. I thought it was really interesting when we talked in class about how the differences in the Deans of Women and the Deans of Men, not only in what they actually did, but in how they saw themselves. How the Deans of Men talked about, trait versus development, and how they saw themselves as born to be deans, and that it was something that you couldn't necessarily teach. Whereas the Deans of Women saw their role as a vital part of helping women gain genuine acceptance into college. One of the articles, it's the Nidifer article, The First Deans of Women, What We Can Learn from Them. There's a quote in here that I wanted to pull that I should have looked at before I started recording, but I forgot to do that. About genuine access. It says on the last page, mere admission is not enough. Genuine access means feeling that you are welcome in the entire community, not ignored, demeaned, harmed, or treated as a social stereotype, or otherwise made to feel threatened or peripheral. Genuine access means that you are welcome as different, and therefore do not need to conform to hegemonic norms. I highlighted that one and drew a little heart next to it. I was like, oh, I love this. This article really spoke to me with my background in women's studies, and then also being in student affairs now. But back to the differences between the Deans of Women and the Deans of Men. The thing that I found really interesting was that the Deans of Women were the people that sort of started our field. It says in the article that they are the foundation of what we now see as student affairs, and the things that they did. And that the way they went about it was by having the first professional association. A lot of us now are members of ACPA or NASPA or, regional associations and things like that. And that they did the first what we would call professional development, which is a big part of how we see our field as legitimate nowadays. That was a really good discussion in class about legitimacy. And I think that there's a big difference in Deans of Men and Deans of Women in that aspect. I found it really interesting that as time went on, and what Dr. York talked about with after the wars, the population of women in college went way back down from like 49% back into the 20s because of the influx of people coming home from the war. But that even though the Deans of Women were phased out, Deans of Men sort of took over their responsibilities, and the responsibilities of the Deans of Men were sort of put by the wayside, and what the Deans of Women did was seen as more important, but we didn't need a woman in there anymore. So all of that plays into the struggle of legitimacy between Deans of Women and Deans of Men. But the thing that I want to prompt you on goes a little bit off on that. The reason that I found this article to be, well, all of these articles to be so interesting was that it sort of taught us what our history is, the history of our profession. And a lot of us are introduced to the profession in an informal way, by someone in the residence halls or in campus rec that just says, hey, this is a job, you can do this as a job and I think you'd be good at it, and we're like, oh, cool. So it's not like you enter college thinking, I'm going to be a student affairs professional and start researching it and things like that. I know I didn't. I entered school thinking I was going to be a museum curator. But I think it's really important that that's how we learn about our history. And I know I had always heard that student affairs is a relatively new profession, going back to when In Loco Parentis went away in the 70s. So with that as our sort of introduction to the field, it was really interesting to see that the roots of student affairs are much deeper, that they go back to the 1890s. And I found myself wondering as we read this, why isn't that common knowledge? why is our informal introduction wrong to this? So my prompt is, why don't we know the history of our profession, and what can we do to spread that knowledge? Just thinking about how you learned about student affairs and what you were taught and how you sort of stumbled into the field, because I think we pretty much all stumble into the field. How are we going to perpetuate that we are a legitimate field with deeper roots than the 1970s, and that what we do is actually important? So looking forward to hearing all of your responses to that, and thanks.